And I'm not saying that every single figure out there is a member of this cult. It's, of course, a whole issue. It's quite problematic to be able to discern. It's a study, like any other study. One must decode, and in order to decode it, you must have familiarity with these cults and how they work. You must know what their code words are, their catchphrases, their symbols. They will tell you who they are, but you have to be able to decode the symbolism. Why is it that Madonna's first video was made in Venice? Why are so many videos and films set in Venice? Why does she wear the crucifix? What do some of the lyrics mean? One of the other important cults was the cult of Venus. The ancient cults worshipped Venus a lot. The names of the place Venice and Vienna, certain cities of the world are actually named after Venus. On the prow of the old navigator ships in the ancient world, the great navigators of the high seas used to have the Stella Maris, or the ladies, the head, the prow. They would have the figure of the female, because navigators worshipped the stars and thought of Venus as their guiding star. And ships were always referred to as her or she. And they're shaped in the form of the Vesica Pisces, which relates to the female. And they float on the waters, which also represent the female. There's a lot of symbolism involved in shipping and navigation. And the tutelary deity that all seamen of the ancient world worshipped was the star Venus. And there's a cult of Venus operating in the world. The James Bond films, for instance, as I was mentioning in Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, the 007s go back to the Tudor dynasty. It's not just a work of fiction here. In fact, in the James Bond movies, one of the most important motifs in that is the use of code words like M and Q. And you'll notice that when the protagonist, the James Bond figure, comes in to get his orders, he very specifically comes from a hall into a small chamber where the female sits behind the desk. And then from that small chamber, he goes into another larger chamber through a secret door or passage that leads to a bigger chamber with a male sitting behind the door. This replicates the interior of the Great Pyramid. And the pyramid, of course, is very sacred to Freemasons and Illuminati. There's a message in these films, secret codes that are being given to us to replicate something from the ancient world that we are not educated to be able to see. But there's a method involved in those series of movies and in many, many others. A lot of the pornographic magazines contain symbolism that shows their origins, relating back to the cult of Venus and this incredible favoritism towards the blonde, down from the earliest times of Hollywood right up to the present day, the cult of the blonde. And of course, those who've done their homework in this fascinating subject understand that the cult of Venus and the cult of Dionysus are involved in not only the dissemination of pornography, but also involved very heavily in white slave trafficking and opium dealing and satanic ritual abuse and child prostitution and what have you. This is slowly coming to light, but this is an old story going back many thousands of years. It's also very important to realize that none of this is covert. These individuals will always put the symbols in front of you if you know how to track it. Even certain movies are made to reveal the agenda and to let you know who's making what and who's doing what. Movies like The Eye of the Devil and The Green Door and Eyes Wide Shut and many, many other movies from different genres contain motifs that, if you know how to decode them, are very significant. And the patron, these individuals that we're talking about, a lot of these cults, are also patronized. They have to have finances. They have to have an agenda. And one of the most powerful dynasties that make up these cults and also patronize these cults are what we know as the Venetians, coming out of Italy. The Venetians were originally the Phoenicians, the worshippers of Venus. And in Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, we show the ancestry of the Phoenicians and how they go back to pre-Diluvian times, even to the time of Atlantis and the high cultures of the ancient world. But the Phoenicians becomes the Venetians of Italy, the Longhi and the Guelphs and other very wealthy families. Their descendants are still occupying the world today. But of course the Venetians, after their conflict with the powers of the Roman Catholic Church, made a move from Venice and settled in Holland and eventually came to England. Upon their move to Holland, the Black Venetians, and this is the name that they go by, the Black Venetians created the Great Amsterdam Bank, the financial hinge of the 17th century, and they created the Dutch East India Company. They also controlled the finances of many royal dynasties like the Stuarts. They are actually the promoters of Martin Luther, of Protestantism, Puritanism, the Jesuits, the Club of Rome, the later Freemasons, and most secret societies. Through the House of Hanover, that's the House of Orange, they came to England and have been dominating there. They've been the dominating power since William III of Orange. This is William III of Orange, known in Ireland as King Billy, the destroyer of the Stuart dynasties. And after him came George Ludwig I, all of the House of Hanover. But the House of Hanover originates from the Venetian line, through the Habsburgs, through the Hohenzollerns, all the way back to Venice and beyond. Queen Victoria, in her time, was the head of the Black Guelphs, called black because their deeds were so black. Literally the queen, the empress of the world. And the Windsor family of today, the modern royals ruling out of England, the Windsors is a name concocted for them today primarily because King George, the father of the Queen of England, couldn't barely speak a word of English. And yet here they are declaring war on Germany, and they're a German family reigning from London. So as part of the propaganda, the name Windsor was concocted for them. But just realize that their actual names are Saxe-Coburg, Battenberg, later changed to Mountbatten, Bourse-Lyon, and Guelph, with Guelph being the most important name. If you're into studying this, please note the name Guelph, G-U-E-L-P-H. That's the connection back to Venice. There's two great students of this, along with Jordan Maxwell. One is the statesman from America, Lyndon LaRouche, who's done some fine work on this in his book, Dope Incorporated. This is the book that put him 2 years in the federal stockade for what he knew. And also the works of Dr. John Coleman, who wrote The Committee of 300 and Diplomacy by Deception, and also One World Order. Dr. John Coleman, an insider who reveals the origin of these cults. If we go back to the symbolism of the stellar cult, we find that these were the original magi, the original architects, the original astrologers, the original navigators. In my work on this subject, I have pointed out many times that these are the originators of the high geometry, all of the great buildings, monuments, temple structures of the world. They're also the creators of our divination arts, principally, and also a lot of the folk tales and fairy stories, and also the idea of teaching great mysteries in the way of a parable or an allegory is also part of their legacy. There are those who watch their flocks by night. In the Bible, we hear that term, watching the flocks by night. Well, the shepherds who watch their flocks by night are nothing but the magi, astrologers who watch their flocks by night, the heavenly flocks, the stars. In the tarot, as I said, the first card of the tarot, which shows a magician, is a throwback to the stellar cult. That little symbol that you see above the head of the magician and that you also see in card number 8 represents the zodiac. It's called the lemniscate. In Celtic tradition, one of the earliest poets of Ireland, the precursor to Merlin, was called Abergahain, or in English you pronounce it Amergin. And he says, "Who but I knows the ages of the moon, the resting place of the sun?" Again, clearly demonstrating that they were stellar cult. Now the primary symbol of the stellar cult, as I said a little earlier, was the serpent, which you see being worn by the pharaohs. It's often called the uraeus or the agathodaimen. Agathodaimen just meaning the winged serpent or the guardian angel. It's where we get the word Holy Spirit from, agathodaimen or agathodaimon. And of course, the ancient antagonism in the Christian hegemony of the evil serpent, and that the solar king has to come out and defeat the dragon or the serpent. I mean, where did these motifs come from? Do we ever stop and think, what on earth is that all about, and where did that symbol come from? And of the many symbols and motifs that you can have, what is this whole thing about having to slay a dragon? Well, it's propaganda again. It's pulpit propaganda. One cult supplanting another. One cult taking the power from another cult, appropriating the wisdom and the technologies and the methodologies of a previous cult. We have the old rivalries between, even in Egypt, in the latter days of Egypt, the old stellar king Set becomes the antagonist of the later sun god Horus. In order to show you the conflict, they say that they're twins. They're all born in the same family, but they're antagonists. We have to read between the lines and see what's being said here. In Irish mythology, we hear about St. Patrick going up to the high mountain and then coming down and saying, "Behold, I've cast out the serpents from the land." And of course, the reference here, as we clearly demonstrated in Atlantis, alien visitation, and genetic manipulation, is again that the serpents is not a physical snakes. This is another piece of propaganda. St. Patrick represents the solar cult, who's coming to take over, and the serpents being the previous Celtic races there, who worship the stars and the earth and the waters. They are now history. They're being suppressed, so they're being cast out. The serpent race is being cast out. But we have mentioned in the Bible to the serpents and the wisdom of the serpents when Jesus remonstrates with his own disciples and says, "Be ye as wise as serpents." Yes, that's right. Be ye as wise as the serpents. What serpents? Well, he's referring to the fact that if only you were as wise as those great astrologers, navigators, and geomancers of old, the serpent race. If only you 12 were as wise as they, then I'd be happy. Because the Christ is aware of the power and wisdom of the stellar cult, the original Magi. In Celtic Ireland, we have tremendous emphasis on the serpent motif, even in Christian era. On many flags, we still see the dragon of the stellar cult being commemorated. They're all throwbacks. In Tara, the very capital city, Tara, in Gaelic means, it comes from the word Drumcain, meaning the hill of the serpents, because the kings were serpent race and they sat on the hill of the serpents. We find that there's a Judaic tribe called the Nashon, for which King David was a member. But we find that this word means serpent. The word Nashon means serpent. And that's where we get the modern word nation. N-A-T-I-O-N means serpent. So we'll just remember that when you hear people talking about the great nation states. Understand that that is a word that has a very ancient history. Thousands of years old, going back to the original Nashons. From the earliest days of Acadia and Sumeria and Babylon, we see the serpent and the serpent gods. In Egypt, the winged serpents. In Greece, we find that Pythagoras, the keeper of the mysteries, one of the wisest men of all times. The word Pythagoras means I am the python. I am the python. I am the serpent. And H.P. Blavatsky says in her Isis Unveiled, she says, Pythagoras never allowed his neophytes to see him during the years of probation, but instructed them from behind a curtain in his cave. We have a Scottish regiment known as the Dragoons. We have the dragon court of the Plantagenets. These fine standing stones and the ancient megaliths are known colloquially and locally as the dragon's teeth, because it was understood by the locals that they were built by the serpent cult. In the United States, at the Ohio Mound, it betrays the same illusion that the ancients were a stellar cult who worshipped the constellations and who are responsible for the great earthworks. The Avebury serpent, practically 8 miles long. In Christianity, we often hear about the cherubim and the seraphim, but what we don't hear about is the meaning of those two words. If you decode and go back to an old concordance and look up the words seraphim and cherubim, it will mean fiery serpent or blazing serpent. So the angels are serpents. And many words again. In etymology, a fascinating subject. We find that the earliest name for the serpent was Cain or Canaan. So the land of Canaan, that's right, the land of the Akkadians, the land where it all began, the Holy Land is known before the Hebrews get there as the land of Canaan, the Canaanites who were murdered and suppressed. The evil ones who worshipped idols. No, just the serpent cult whose time is to be murdered and massacred now because the solar cult has arrived, or the Saturnian cult is in town. And the word Cohen, ask any Jewish person what the word Cohen means, and they will tell you that it means serpent priest. The word Cain or the word Khan, like in James Khan. In the Far East we have Chan, but Chan means serpent. In the Middle East we have Khan, K-H-A-N, like we would say Mr. It's a title for a male, Khan. The word Khan refers to the serpent. In Ireland you have the boy's name, Kieran. you have the female or the girl's name Karen. And Karn, the word for death, but actually really means the serpent. So in Egypt, every time you see a god with the stars about their head or with a headdress of stars, just realize what is being mentioned here. This is a member of the stellar cult. They're implying that there is a cult of power and gods to be worshipped. We don't have to look very far for this motif. The Statue of Liberty is a stellar cult icon that goes back to Sechet, the old Egyptian goddess. It was just shown exactly like that, with star in her 7 rays in her crown. The subject of astrology comes down to us from the stellar cult. They are the ones who brought us the study of astronomy and astrology. They understood that the sun rose at the vernal equinox, rose to its highest position at the summer solstice, and then fell into winter at the autumn equinox. And that particular arch was revered, and it was called the Northern Arch. And to commemorate it, and because the stellar cult were great builders, they would build arches in all the cities of the world. And still today, when we build an arch or we create an arch, that comes from the commemoration of an astrological motif, the Northern Arch, the sun passing over the zodiac. And that's why in the middle of arches you have the keystone, which usually has a date on it, because the date has to do with zodiacal degrees that the sun passes through. And the stellar cult's main deity, or one of the earliest deities, was Nuth, the heavenly mother, the goddess of the night sky, the primordial Madonna. They were fixated on this idea of the earth being the terrestrial father, the red king that you see in chess, but the stellar mother, or white queen. You have Guinevere and you have Arthur. Guinevere literally means white queen. That's all it means, and it's a reference to Isis. But Isis is a reference to the moon, the white queen up there in the heavens. And the red king is, guess who? The sun. So thrones were put beside each other, red and white, male and female, Leo and Cancer. They were fixated on the idea of bringing heaven to earth. They didn't see a separation between the terrestrial and the celestial. And so when they would build their monuments, their castles, their temples, their universities, their cities, it was absolutely fundamental that none of that building could ever begin without honoring the stars and then even encoding into these structures symbols of the stars, which is why if you go to the Arc of Triomphe or you go to most of the universities of the world and study them, actually look at the walls and the stained glass windows and the floors and the mosaics of even quite modern buildings, and not to mention the city layouts, you will see stars and emblems of the heavens. This is an old practice. We know from just looking and studying the ancients that they were fascinated with the stars and the heavens. They were fascinated with geometry, the measurement of the earth and the measurement of the stars. In fact, the word geometry means that, the measurement of the goddess Gaia, or the earth. So they understood that in order to honor their gods, they should pay attention to them, that there was movements in the heavens, that there was mathematical forms of communication, and that you weren't a proper disciple of your God unless you paid attention to the nuances and subtleties that were happening around you in the heavens. This is where astrology was born. Demeter, the Greek god, literally means the same thing, the earth, measuring the earth. We get words like matter and matrix and mother and mathematics and marriage and mate, all coming out of the word Maat, which was the most ancient of the goddesses, the goddess of balance and the goddess of measurement of the Egyptians. As I said, Freemasons and secret societies keep these mysteries. The very Freemasonic symbol is a mere simulacra. The symbol of the compass and the rule is a geometric version of the Egyptian Nuth and Jeb, the earth god Jeb, copulating, merging with the sky goddess Nuth. Freemasonry originates from the stellar cult. They are the present keepers of the mysteries of the stellar cult. The stellar cult's philosophy can be summed up very simply. No difference between psychic energy and physical energy. Incomprehensible. Yes, they knew what two was. If you put down two stones, they'd understand there's two things there. But they had no understanding of what we know as duality. There was no word for duality. There was only one thing to be studied. There was No separation between macrocosm and microcosm. Everything was unified. Everything was a holarchy. They tried to show this in the way they lived. They tried to commemorate this in the building of Stonehenge and in the villages that were circular. And of course, we all know about the intense and detailed geometry that went into some of these monuments and Cyclopean ruins. That's a whole study in itself. But even again in modern context, cities are based on the zodiac. Here's the center of Paris with 12 radiating streets. And Paris is not the only example. Though we may have the solar cult attempting it at later stages, the solar cult in their buildings are borrowing or appropriating the geometrical standards and skills of an earlier cult. Yes, we do have those skills today, but where did they come from? The 7 wonders of the world and many more wonders besides are originate in a certain cult of ancient times, not just centered in Egypt. Every culture, including even the Viking and the Celtic and the Maya, and even in Africa, you have stellar representatives of the stellar cult. When we hear the simple term city hall, do we realize that that comes from somewhere? The word city comes from cetus, which is the word in Latin for the female vagina or the female opening. And the word hall is a derivation of the Latin phallus, which is the male member, the phallic. So city hall literally is again the coming together of the male and the female. Remember, we were talking about terrestrial and celestial. These cities were made like a circle, and then you would have a obelisk in the center, or a fountain in the center, or a clock tower in order to transmit terrestrial events and symbolism to earth. And then the city hall, which was the center of all civic society, would be called the cetus and the hall, the phallic and the male and the female coming together. City hall. Jerusalem lies at the center of all medieval maps. The most sacred place is this most holy city, and was the supposed site of Jesus' own burial, the church of the Holy Sepulchre. So again, all holy places, whether they're of the ancient world or the new one, embody certain motifs. And I have to emphasize that this is not something of the ancient past. Cities of the modern world are done this way. In Ireland we have the oldest temple site in the world, so thousands of years before the pyramid. We have a place in Ireland called Brúchnaboyne, or in English it's New Grange, and it sits on the river known as the Boan. That's why it's called the Brúchnaboyne. Boan was the cow goddess, and the river Boan was her river. So there's the whole idea of the female again, that near the river is this most ancient of tombs. But what's remarkable about this tomb is its geometry. It was built and fashioned by the stellar cult. It's a complete enigma. It was built without cement. And what's more astounding is that on the 21st, 22nd and 23rd of December, that's the winter solstice, the sun rises on the horizon, and then like something out of Indiana Jones, literally creeps across and touches a very small window in New Grange. Above the door of this immense tomb is a little portal, a window, 7 feet high, and the sun, a beam of light, will pass into this window and then go into the inner chamber and fall on the back wall. Many American scholars like Arthur C. Clarke have gone and looked at this and checked this out. And even though the heavens have shifted in many thousands of years, this event still takes place mysteriously. They can't understand how this building was designed. The light pierces the inner chamber on those 3 days, and on the same night, of the solstice nights, the moonlight will do exactly the same thing. And this is not the only example of this. There are many tombs in Ireland and in Celtic countries where this anomaly takes place. Or they might do it in a different way. You might have the phallic tower, representing the male phallic, on the mound or the hill. Let's not forget we have in Christianity the Mount of Olives. We have the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, we've got the male sun god, the phallic, ithyphallic male, standing there giving a sermon. But let's not forget where he's doing it. Don't we understand there's paganism involved here? That he's not doing it sermon in the throne, he's not sermon in the city center, sermon at the top of a castle turret, sermon on a horseback. It's Sermon on the Mount. Another feature that harkens back to the stellar cult specifically is the idea that the interior of churches have the dome. The celestial dome, or the domos, representing the night sky and the heavens. But again, the idea that not just in city centers, but different parts of the famous cities, we always have the clock tower. Now this clock dial is usually so far up in the sky that you can't even see it to tell what time it is, so it's an architectural motif alone. And that is to represent the same idea we've been talking about. And that's why the dome, the spires are like this. They're shaped like that because it's transmitting celestial energy down to the terrestrial. Because the ancient creators of cities understood this, that there is a symbiosis between the heavenly and the earth. Just as in a human being's life, his fate is connected to some zodiac out there, so the whole of the fate of mankind, the fate of those who live on earth and the communities of the world also is written in the heavens. We see these architectural masterpieces and we know subconsciously, we're attracted to it, we know it's beautiful, but we have consciously forgot why. And as I said, this is again to be understood as not something of remote history. This is something of the modern age today. David Oveson, an American writer, in his book The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, has discovered that in Washington, D.C., for instance, there are 23 complete zodiacs in Washington, in the architecture, secreted into the architecture there. And there's over 1,000 other zodiacal and planetary symbols. And there's 4 zodiacs in London. London is also divided into 28 boroughs representing the lunations of the moon. There's not a single building in England of any importance that's not built over some Celtic site of the previous stellar and lunar cult. Those who've studied this subject know that. But Oveson and other researchers are now discovering that the secret societies like the Freemasons, for whatever purposes, have designed the cities meticulously to not only align with certain constellations, but to commemorate certain stars like the star Sirius and Draco and Alpha Draconis and the Pole Star and the Bear, Ursa Major, so on. However, we've got to realize that there was mistakes were also made in this transposition. Cyril Fagan, in his book Astrological Origins, says that in their desire to appear highly intellectual, scientific and mathematical, the Greeks, probably about the time of Alexander the Great, adopted the solar nomenclature, thereby turning ancient zodiacal symbolism topsy-turvy and making it sheer nonsense. This must be borne in mind very deeply, that when we're even researching and studying this subject and when we come upon things that don't quite make sense, this can help you to realize that, yes, you're studying this here, but we have the Greeks and the Romans and the medieval period, we've got the Christians, and all of these individuals take the ancient gnosis, but they twist it and contort it and subvert it. And therefore it's a process. This is what this program is dedicated to, is trying to help you in this decoding process so that you may get back to the original theology. Theology is very important for our lives. Mythology is very important for our lives. Spirituality is, but not the one that's been handed down to us, sanitized and homogenized and corrupted and subverted. This package that we just buy and install. There's a much more ancient one. And we need to get back to that as we come full circle in today's world. Now, I've already made mention in the early part of this program about the fact that the Bible still does contain many enigmatic phrases and passages that allude to what we were talking about in terms of the ancient cults. Now, in John 14, we also read one of these most enigmatic passages. It says, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also." Now, Jordan Maxwell has pointed out in his work that this term, like many passages in the Bible, have just blatantly misinterpreted. I mean, obviously we should realize that it's impossible to have many mansions in a house. But you could have many rooms in a house. You could have many compartments of a house. You could have many houses in the sky, like in the zodiac. Could the mansion be the heavens, the dome of the heavens, the great theater of the mysteries? And within that theater, that great mansion, there could be many houses? Well, that's in our belief what that passage actually refers to. It refers to the zodiac and the houses there. It refers to the girdle of Isis, the girdle of the goddess Nuth. We understand that the 12 tribes of Israel, there's the number 12, is another allusion to the zodiac. And the Hebrews had a wall, great and high, and had 12 gates. And at the gates 12 angels, and names were written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And anyone who knows anything about Hebrew astrology or the tribes of Israel know that all the symbols of the tribes of Israel were the astrological signs. Rabbis admit this. There's books on Hebrew astrology showing you that you not only have 12 tribes, but the symbols of each of the tribes of Israel are astrological symbols. And they were great worshippers of certain feast days throughout the year. Now, well, when it comes to the number 12, we're in a whole incredible subject there. We got not only the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 hours, the 12 months. At Catholic confirmation is at age 12, the ceremony to represent full circle of the zodiac. You have a confirmation ceremony. We've got jury members with the judge, the magistrate being the 13th member, representing the occult 13th sign of the zodiac. We've got the 12 patriarchs of Israel, the 12 brothers of Joseph, the 12 stages of the underworld process in Egypt. We've got 12 stages of the mummification process, a very rigorous idea there in mummification that you should have 12 stages. Egypt itself was divided into 12 provinces, one for each of the signs of the zodiac. In the primal conflict between Set and Osiris, when Osiris is finally killed, we find that he's cut up into 12 pieces, the body of the hero. 12 stones is what Moses erects for the tribes. Arthur had 12 knights. Balder in Scandinavian mythology had 12 judges. Odysseus had 12 companions. Romulus, 12 shepherds. Roland in French, a troubadour tradition, had 12 peers. Jacob had 12 sons. Hrolf in the Danish myths had 12 berserkers. There's 12 Aesir, that's the god of the high Teutons. In the octave we have 12 notes. And in the brain we have 12 cranial nerves. We'll come back to that later on. But Jesus and his 12 helpers is the most common one to people, the apostles. But again, we have a message here. If you actually look at the symbolic way that this was communicated to us by the artists, like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the other medieval and Mannerist painters, we'll notice something very interesting. In Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, for instance, we understand that we have Jesus at the Last Supper, and we understand that Jesus is the Son. But if you actually examine this remarkable painting closely, you'll find something enigmatic. The 12 are not just loosely grouped around the Son, around Jesus Christ. There's a pattern to them. They're in groups of 3. And those groups of 3 represent the seasons. They represent the zodiological signs. But the zodiological signs are, of course, aligned with the months. So the group on the far left, and each group is only speaking to itself. They're all communicating only to themselves. So let's say that summer, autumn, winter, and spring, autumn, summer, winter, whatever way you want to look at it, that's what we're seeing as the real theme in this fine painting. The 12, but the actual divisions of the seasons. Because we understand that in the center is the Christ, the enlightened one, the Son, who will come again. That means he'll go round and round and round, right? Only to come again every day in the diurnal cycle and also in the zodiacal cycle of the year. When you see the great temples and cathedrals, churches of the world, you'll always notice the 12 panes of the rose windows. Again, a commemoration to the stellar cult. The idea of the round table of ancient times. They sat at a round table to emphasize that the real round table was up above your head. It was literally the zodiac. And we turn to the Celtic calendar, we find the heart of the stellar and lunar paradigm. Not only do you find the 12 or occasionally 13 signs, but we also find that these signs were related to Earth. Each of the signs of the zodiac were not so much given an animal motif as they are today. They were assigned to the 12 trees. So the idea of the tree of life being a very important motif and also connecting to the earth. The worship of the trees was an original zodiac. When we study the Celtic seasonal cycle, we find the great feast days, which were later transfigured or transposed into some of the modern holidays. If you've read any of the fine books on this subject or researched this subject, Robert Graves and Caitlin Matthews, lots of books out there on the subject, you'll start to understand a couple of things, and that is that the calendar was changed. It was altered from a stellar to a solar-centric one. We have different stories going on. The calendar year's opening date was artificially also changed. That the saints' days were merely superimposed upon more ancient sidereal festivals. And the most important one is that there was a supplantation of the feminine principle. There was the masculinization of the deities and the iconic symbols. That last one there is an entire subject in itself that I deal with more elaborately in the other program in the series called Divination and the Goddess Tradition. This whole idea of the masculinization and slow subversion of the feminine principle, which in turn has horrific ramifications for human consciousness and for gender relations and so on. Now, David Duncan, in his book The Calendar, says that from the beginning, the Roman calendar was a powerful political tool that governed religious holidays, festivals, market days, and constantly changing schedules of days when it was legal to conduct judicial and official business in the courts and governments. The inaccurate calendar played havoc not only with the farmers and sailors, but also with the population becoming more dependent than ever on trade, commerce, law, and civil administration in a rapidly growing empire that desperately needed a standard system of measuring time. So what David Duncan is telling us is that we were not just given a set of time, a calendar, which is of course needed. We were given this hybrid, this concoction that was so off the wall that the ancient people found it very confusing. Scholars like Joseph Campbell have always mentioned anyway that the very language of the Bible is a mercantile language. He brought that out. Many have noticed this. Because yes, there was a paradigm shift when the Saturnian and the solar cult are becoming dominant. It's less and less and less to do about your empowerment and religion and true worship of God. No, it's got more to do with subjugation. Of course the calendar had to be changed because we're not meant to be worshiping nature. We're not meant to be worshiping and believing in the real. We're meant to be dumbed down and in total servitude. And one of the best ways to do that was to subvert time and to subvert the calendar. But evidences of the stellar cult are to be found on all the flags of the world. Children always remark, why are these stars on these flags? Even from childhood you notice that. Yes, well, why indeed? Why would the flags of nations have this motif so prevalent all over the world? The stars, even the European Union's flag has 12 stars representing the zodiac. We've got rising suns, we've got crescent moons, we've got stars. Well, the reason is what we're telling you here, that the whole idea is that when you realize that all the modern establishments and institutes and paradigms come out of the stellar and solar and lunar cult, now we can understand why we see these motifs. The California flag of America. Everyone thinks it shows the grizzly bear and the red star, and yet it does not. This is yet another cryptic device. What it refers to is the bear, yes, but it's the bear up there. The red star is the pole star around which moves Ursa Major, the bear. What you're actually seeing on the California flag is nothing less than an astro theological motif disguised to look like something else. Now the Egyptians, unlike us today, did not open their year at December 21st or January 1st, or even where astrologers are wont to think of the beginning of the zodiac, which is Aries. No, their year opened in the sign of Virgo, which in those days, because of processional movement of the heavens, was around July 20th, 25th. This is when the Nile started to rise and the flood waters began to rise. That was around about the period when Sirius, the star, was high in the sky, around the July 20th and 25th, the season. And that was the sun would rise into the constellation or sign of Virgo. And of Virgo is, of course, the sign of the Virgin, which has always been depicted for ancient times as the female goddess or the female queen, the beautiful virgin, Virgo. Well, of course, naturally, if the year for the Egyptians opened in Virgo, then like ours, we have 12 seasons, 12 months to go through until the year closes. And the year will close, logically, in the sign before Virgo. And the sign before Virgo, just pick up a coffee table book on astrology or log onto the internet and look up, and you'll see that the sign that comes before Virgo is Leo the lion. Leo the lion was then the closing of the year. So that is why you have a sphinx, because it is the head of the Virgin and the tail of a lion, meaning in one symbol. This is the way the ancients did things, so beautifully, so figuratively. The idea is that the head of the female looks out to the horizon, her gaze follows the whole earth, which is circular, and comes back to the body of the lion. It is simply a symbol of the zodiac. It's a symbol of the zodiac in sandstone, standing 66 feet high. And all it is to tell you is that we were astrologers. We were the Magi. So the first sign of the zodiac, Virgo. The sign of the Virgin. The last sign of the zodiac, Leo. Put them together and you've got the Sphinx. Virgo was the female, the Virgin, holding the sheaf of wheat. Now the sun entered the sign of Virgo around July 25th. Upon entering this female sign, the ancient cosmologists said that the sun, that's the Son of God, the heavens, was born again, born of a virgin. That's where that term comes from. The Christian idea of being born of a virgin, one of the meanings of it, there are many. But in the stellar cult, it was the idea that the Son of God was now being born in the sign of the Virgin, or of a virgin. When the Sphinx was constructed, its visage even faced that part of the horizon where the constellations of Leo and Virgo rose at nightfall. So this face, the eyes were looking to the horizon, but at night, Virgo and Leo would rise right in front of the eyes of the Sphinx. Now, because the beginning of this zodiacal belt was in Virgo, the zodiac was called the girdle of Isis, the virgin goddess. She was the prototype of Mary. The son of Isis was Horus. Mary's son was Jesus. Horus was the basis of the Christ myth. His name meant light or sun, and that's where we get the word horizon, or the zone of Horus. And we also get hours from his name. And that's right. Horus's zone, that's the zone of the sun, when the sun rises on the horizon, it's the zone of Horus, the sun god, the horizon. The old word for prayers in the Shakespearean era was orisons, and we all know that we turn to the east. Cultures still do this. You turn to the east to say your prayers, your orisons. Why do you turn to the east? Because the sun is going to rise there. You worship the sun. It's a solar cult. And Horus, you just have to turn two of the letters around and you get hours, H-O-U-R-S, because they used to say, to take the time, where is Horus now? Where is the golden falcon now? Meaning, what hour of the day is it? What Horus of the day is it? We even tell our children to be as good as gold, meaning be as good as the golden one, Horus. You are a youngster. A child is known as a young star. Like Horus was the youngster of Isis and Osiris. So just remember, when you hear that term, born of a virgin, think astrology. But again, we're being told this. You only have to look at the symbolism. Once you've opened your right brain, you're using your whole mind, you've learned some pattern recognition, you'll find that nothing's being concealed from you. Mother Mary with the sun above her head and the crescent moon under her feet. We have it in the corporate logos of today, Columbia Pictures. The Virgin with the sun gleaming behind her back, or holding the great torch. Literally, the sun in Virgo. What you're seeing in that logo is nothing more than an astrological motif. And if you've seen the subversive use of sacred symbolism, we go into this very much and show how so many corporate logos date from this, or come from this idea of the movement of the sun through the constellations. The original Madonna, born of a virgin. The solar cult get hold of this, and they move things around. Horus suddenly becomes more aligned with the sun, yes, but more aligned with, say, Aries. Jesus holding the Lamb of God. Everyone knows the Lamb or the Ram is the sign of Aries. So they move the Son of God away from Virgo and move it to a new place, a new identification. And that can be okay to do in some respects, but it's what the mythographers do every age. They change the symbolism. Once upon a time, the bull was worshipped and the cow goddess. That represents Taurus, the bull. Later on, the ram. Egypt's filled with the ram symbols because that's Aries. As the sun moves, the mythologies change. So the pyramid and the Sphinx and many of the other tombs and temples, structures, are patently astronomical and astrological. And even when you render or see the Sphinx rendered, you'll notice that it also has wings, or it might have claws, or it might have scales. It has the head of a woman, it has the tail of a dragon or a lion. Again, that just represents the four corners, the four coming together, the wings and the claws and the body of a lion, the cardinal points of the zodiac. Now, to make astronomy and astrology possible, that is to have a science or an art of astrology or astronomy, there are three basic celestial cycles or movements that must be taken into account. The first is the rotation of the Earth around the Sun. Okay, so that's a rotation we're talking about. There's three different kinds of rotation that make this science of astrology possible. There's the movement of the Earth around the Sun. Then we have the rotation of the Earth on its own axis. Okay, that's another movement of circular movement. On its own axis, the Earth will revolve. Then we have the slow wobble of the axis of the Earth as it turns. So we've got the movement of the Earth as it turns, but it doesn't just turn perfectly tholiiform, perfectly straight. It wobbles. And you'll notice this if you have a spinning top or a gyroscope. You'll notice that it has a wobble effect on the axis. Now, these three celestial motions were known in the ancient world and are absolutely central. And they were commemorated in many logos and symbols, especially those you see on churches and ancient motifs. Now, due to the wobble of the axis of the Earth, the sun, moon, planets, and constellations appear to move backwards through the 12 signs. The sun takes 2,160 years to traverse one sign of 30 degrees, moving 1 degree every 72 years. The entire cycle lasts 25,920 years. This round is known by astrologers and astronomers as the precession of the equinoxes. So this is getting a little deeper into the subject of astrology. There are 12 signs of the zodiac, and the sun moves backwards through them. Of course, when it moves backwards, we see from our Earth as if the constellations are moving the other direction, okay? So it's just a matter of parallax view and perspective. But the sun, every day, in fact, every morning that you go out and the sun rises, same thing every year. Every year at the vernal equinox, when the sun rises in the spring, the ancients realized that it's moving slightly eastward every time, just a few degrees or minutes of arc. It does not rise every morning or every year in the same place on the horizon. Charted over time, they realized that to go through a sign of 30 degrees, right, all signs of the zodiac are 30 degrees, for the sun to rise at the different spots in just one sign takes 2,160 years. That's 72 years to move 1 degree. So it moves 1 degree in the average lifespan of a man. This is very important to occultists, the idea that lifespan of the human is connected to this movement of the sun. But to go through all the 12 signs of the zodiac takes 25,920 years. That's called the Great Cycle, or the Platonic Cycle. There's different names for it. And generally, astrologers and astronomers know this, and they call it the precession of the equinoxes. But we want to show you how important that is to the unveiling of the mysteries of religion. Now, we have a thing called the horoscope of the Earth. I'm sure a lot of you have gone and had your astrology chart done. It's a fascinating thing to have happen. Now, we look at our chart and the astrologer will tell us, oh, this is your rising sign, and this is your sun sign, and so on. Well, the Earth itself has a chart. You couldn't have astrology without the Earth. I mean, we're all in the Earth. But how many have ever thought of the fact that the Earth itself has a chart? It has a rising sign. Now, in your chart, what the astrologers who are more exoteric may not have told you is that there is a descendant. If you have an ascendant, that's a rising sign, you also have a descendant, which is equally, if not more important, than your ascendant sign. So just bear this in mind. But when you go to the bigger level and you think of the Earth, we have the rising sign of the Earth, and we also have the descending sign. Now, the astrological ascendant is presently in the last few degrees of the sign of Pisces. Okay, so the Earth's sign is Pisces. Therefore, the descendant is in exactly the opposite sign of Virgo. That's because the ascendant and the descendant are on a straight line. They face each other perfectly in an opposite situation. So the position of the descendant is as important for the chart of the Earth as the ascendant is. We cannot understand the times we are living in or those to come unless we are familiar with the permutations of these astrological oppositions. And these oppositions are very important to the ancient world. If you even look at the symbol for Lady Justice in the tarot, or the magician in that strange pose that he's in with up and below, and the Pythagoreans in the Sophics said, as above, so below. They were trying to emphasize this idea that if you're looking there, make sure that you look to what's in the polar opposite. All things are connected. All things are in balance. We can't have Aries without the opposite sign of Libra. All signs are perfectly polarized. It's very interesting to notice these oppositions in astrology. In the tarot cards, we have card 3 and 4, Venus and Mars, the goddess and the god, the male and the female. And so it is on the astrological level. And as I said, as the sun moves eastward, backwards through the sign, it appears that the constellations are moving in the other direction. Now the tarot, one of the great secrets, we don't have time to get into it in this presentation, but I do in other presentations and in other talks and on the website and in various books and so on. I have always pointed to the fascination of the tarot. One of its most remarkable mysteries that's connected with the tarot is that the 22 major arcana are literally demarcations of that movement, that processional movement we've just been talking about. Each of the cards actually represent little Polaroids, if you will, or photographs of each of those ages. It must be some incredible cult that can encapsulate in one card all the happenings of 2,160 years. But that's exactly what was done. So all the way back from the age of Virgo, Libra, in fact all the way around, each of the cards represents an age of precession, a precessional age. Now again, we are in the age of Pisces, or we're at the very end of Pisces. The sun right now is at the very last degrees of Pisces, ready to move into the sign of Aquarius. That's where we are historically. In the age of Virgo, the pyramid was constructed. This is why in the present age of Pisces, its mirror opposite, antiquarian scholars and speculative laymen have been so interested in uncovering its secrets. Just giving you another anecdote here to show you how important this is in our daily life. It's not just a humble little personal chart that you get. Astrology has many other permutations. In the age of Virgo, that's why the Sphinx is there, by the way, representing Virgo. But what's a few hundred yards away from it is this pyramid. The pyramid and the Sphinx were constructed in what we know as the age of Libra and Virgo. That's many thousands of years ago. If each sign is 2,160 years, then you just count back 6 or 7 signs, and you'll find that you're in the age of Virgo and Libra. And it was ordered to commemorate this that they put a Sphinx there saying, here we are, the age of Virgo. But Virgo, as we've just seen, is the opposite of the sign of Pisces in which we're now living. That is why many people like Edgar Cayce and other philosophers have said that it would be in the age of Pisces that there would be this re-fascination with all mysteries Egyptian. I completely confer with that, because programs like this and the revival through Jordan Maxwell and myself of the subject of astrotheology are part of this process. There's a certain etheric connection in time. Time is not a linear thing. It is a very spiralic thing. And there's a symbiosis between these ages. Buckminster Fuller, Edgar Cayce, they said that the mysteries of the pyramid, the mysteries of all things Egyptian would come to light in the age of Pisces. So again, the hermit for Virgo, the moon for Pisces. Now in the age of Pisces, when the sun moved many thousands of years ago now, that's over 2,000 years ago, the sun moved into the age of Pisces. Well, the symbol for Pisces is the fish and the fish god. And we have in the age of Pisces the coming of the solar cult and the rise of Judeo-Christianity. That's why the headdress of the Pope is the fish's head, and why he wears the fisherman's ring, the ring of the fisherman. It's the age of Pisces. Now, competent astrologers know that the negative traits associated with the sign of Pisces, okay? So there's positive traits of every sign, every symbol. No symbol is inherently negative. There's positive and negative. But competent astrologers know that the negative traits associated with the sign of Pisces concern deception, vice, hidden agendas, mass delusion, and the misuse of spiritual virtue and power. So, in the age of Pisces, it was to be expected that the world would experience its share of these negatives on a macrocosmic level. And boy, has it done that. As the age of Pisces comes to a close, though, the deceivers know that the paradigm shift which will occur, which does not favor their machinations. This understanding has led them to make many subtle alterations in their age-old stratagems. The study and tracking of these expedient accommodations, prompted by astromantic and cosmological phase shifts, amounts to an entire subject in itself. So simply put, all this technology, the rise of technology, is a very Aquarian thing. The rise of certain New Age groups, the interest in divination and spirituality, is a harbinger to the coming of the age of Aquarius. The empowerment of females, which has still not really happened yet but is on its way, is also a part of that. But you see, the mythographers, these individuals who create whole mythologies, understand that this is also coming. And therefore they don't sit easy. They create new mythologies. And where's this all coming out of? Vatican, which comes from the word Vaticanus, literally meaning the place of the sorcerers. So just realize when you're talking about Vatican, you're talking about the place of the sorcerers. Tony Bushby says, Tacitus described Rome at the time as a place where every horrible and shameful iniquity from every quarter of the world pours in and finds a welcome. It's the product of all these cults coming together. And they were heavily into astrology. That's why the cross is used. That's why in Celtic countries you see the ring around the cross, representing the zodiac and the cross. Again, in the symbolism, you'll always see the sun back of the cross, because they understood that this was about astrology. And what of the age of Aquarius, when the sun makes its transition? Do the religions have anything to say about that? Well, remember, John 14, in my Father's house are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, ye may be also. The age of Aquarius is said to begin in AD 2740, but of course, there's different scholars have different dates. However, as the sun moves towards the final degrees of the previous sign, the descendants of the great cults of power who are at the helm of the religions and governments need to make arrangements for change. As each age terminates, the appointed mythographers have to get ready to script new mythologies consistent with the complex symbolism of the coming age. Their work is analogous to the Madison Avenue ad man, only their hot product is literally the New World Order. The end of an age is always distinguished by orchestrated chaos and conflagration. This is the meaning of Armageddon. So end times, millennial angst, comings of new aeons, new ages, the passing away of old paradigms, the rescripting of new ones, the coming of a new world order, a new age of the world, is a reference to this astrological changeover. And each age is known in all the mythologies of the world to end in calamity. There's an Armageddon, an apocalypse, not of the end of the world, but of the end of the age, in which there'll be debauchery and iniquity. So as these guys get ready to vacate, not literally of course, but rescript their mythologies, change their masks, we better understand the symbolism. One of the most important things to also realize about this precession of the equinox phenomena is that when you study it, you come to understand how the art of prophecy works. Morning, noon, and night, you'll have to put up with the detractors telling you there's no such thing, it's all malarkey, it's all gibberish. There's no such thing as astrological prediction. There's no such thing as doing readings and whatnot. Well, the fact of the matter is, of course it's possible. As we've just said, the tarot is a depiction. One of its mysteries, one of its many mysteries, is that it's literally a depiction of all the ages of the zodiac. So using the cards in that way, one can know what comes in different ages, using the symbolism of the tarot cards. Divination contains many secrets that we're not aware of. The 10th century Arabian historian and author Masudi says that on the eastern or Great Pyramid built by the ancients, the celestial spheres were inscribed. Likewise, the position of the stars and their circles, together with the history and chronicles of past times, of that which is to come and of every future event. Also one may find there the fixed stars, and what comes about in their progression from one epoch to another. That's right, on the pyramid walls, in the tarot cards that was created in ancient times to depict these astronomical events. In Ecclesiastes 1 it says, "Is no new thing under the sun? Is there a thing of which one might say, see this, it is new? It has already been for the ages which were before." That's right, nothing new under the sun. Not only is the Bible the center of Judeo-Christianity, but of course we have the cross, the crucifix, the story of Calvary. Well, Madame Helena Blavatsky says the crucifix was an instrument of torture and utterly common among Romans, as it was unknown among Semitic nations. It is certainly not the Christian cross that John had in mind when speaking of the signet of the living God. That's right, it wasn't the cross of Calvary, of torture, that John had in mind. We're going to find out what cross he had in mind when he was thinking of symbolizing Christianity. Tony Bushby says of it, the symbol of the cross originated as part of an ancient Egyptian initiatory rite and eventually found its way into Christianity. The church stated that in its history there is no proof of the use of the cross until much later than the 6th century. It is recorded in Christian archives that the general use of the crucifix was ratified at the 6th Ecumenical Council in 680 AD. The council decreed that the figure of a man fastened to a cross now be adopted, and the new church logo was later confirmed by Emperor Hadrian I. About a century later, the first pictures of Jesus Christ standing against a cross slowly start to appear. So we're talking about 700-800 years after the rise of Christianity, the cross suddenly becomes the central motif. Bishop Kaleno, he said that of the several varieties of cross still in vogue as national and ecclesiastical emblems, there is not amongst them the existence of which may not be traced to the remotest antiquity. They were the common property of the Eastern nations. So there's nothing unique about the cross in Christianity. Tony Bushby, in his Bible Fraud, he says, there was no verification of a landmark or significant crucifixion of a person called Jesus Christ in the writings of such highly regarded contemporary historians as Philo, Tacitus, Pliny, Suetonius, Epictetus, Cluvius, Rufus, Quintus, Curtius Rufus, Josephus, Plutarch, and the Roman consul Publius Petronius. None, no mention. Stephen Knapp, in his book Proofs of a Vedic Culture's Global Existence, he says, it was not until the 6th Synod of Constantinople that it was decided that the symbol of Christianity would be represented from that time on as a man crucified on a cross. In fact, the earliest instances of any artwork that illustrates Jesus on a cross can be traced back only to the 8th or 9th century. So how biographical is that? That they have to wait 800 years before they go, oh, let's use a cross. But of course the ancient world knew all about it and had been using it for generations. Its origin, again, is the zodiac. We have two phenomena, two other cycles of importance in the heavens, without which you couldn't have astrology or astronomy, and these are known as the ecliptic and the celestial equator. There is a trajectory of the sun around the earth. Okay, we mentioned that. There's the trajectory of the sun around the earth. That is a band of about 17 degrees wide, on which are the major constellations. That is the zodiac. Now this belt itself crosses another belt called the celestial equator. When the sun annually reaches the junction point of this cross, we have the spring and autumn equinoxes. Now for those of you who are coming to this for the first time and have no background in astrology or astronomy, simply take a globe, or take even two globes. Take the one that has the axis bent, like a globe of the planet Earth. And then imagine another globe that's not the Earth, but just a perfect sphere, right? They're one in one hand, one in the other. A perfect sphere, like a crystal ball, and then the other one, a globe. If you have one in your house, pick it up and look at it. The axis goes this way. And of course, if the axis of the Earth goes that way, then the equator of the Earth is at a slight slant of 25 degrees, right? 23 point something degrees or whatever it is. If you project that equator out to the night sky, which of course is nothing but another dome around the whole of the Earth, can be considered the theater of the night sky as a dome to astrologers and astronomers. But if you project that plane of the ecliptic, that's the equator, we're talking the equator here, Think of that as being magnified or projected out to the night sky. That is what is known in astrology as the ecliptical belt. But of course the night sky would have its own equator, would it not? That night sky that envelops the earth can be that other globe that you're holding in your imagination, which has a straight axis. If that equator around that other globe was projected out, it would be straight. So one would be curved and one would be straight. And if you bring them together like those two hoops that a magician uses, right? Get two bracelets and bring them together at an angle, they will cross at 2 points. Right? So two interlocking circles have 2 points of conjunction. In the year, when you cross the ecliptic and the celestial equator, those two joins is where we have, when the sun reaches them, that is, we have the spring and autumn equinoxes. So as the sun approaches those two junctions, as you can see in that diagram there, at the place where the two belts cross, you have the solstices and the equinoxes. And of course, there's 2 of each, making 4. Here's a better picture of it. The vernal equinox facing the autumnal equinox, the summer solstice facing the winter solstice. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the original cross that John was talking about as the symbol of Christianity, because he understood that the 12 disciples, Jesus representing the sun, from the nativity onwards, this was all about the solar cult. And he wanted the symbol of the cross to represent the zodiacal cross, the great cross of the zodiac. How many flags do you know? How many flags do you know in the world that contain that cross? Here's a St. George's cross. What you're actually seeing there is a minute part of these 2 cycles. Those 2 lines, or those 2 bars, look very straight, don't they? But if you were to project them out and think of them actually as 2 circles, and the point of crossing is the crossing of those 2 circles, now you will understand why the flags of the world were chosen with stars and motifs on them, and why this peculiar symbol of the cross is found. It represents that very coming together, but of course they're focusing in on it, of the crossing point of the ecliptic and the equator. And the blue is nothing but the sky above. From Celtic crosses onwards, which are most blatant images of this, we see the circle of the zodiac and the solar cross, the astrological cross. So just remember, when you see the cross and the sun god, we're talking astrology again. Here's the symbol for the Golden Dawn, secret society. They know all about it. There's the cross of 4, and below it the Trinity and the sun. Here's a corporate logo for the X-Files. It's just one of many. You pick on this one right now, but there's many like this, showing you exactly the same idea, the Earth. But look how mysteriously this cross of the X is placed. Somebody knows something. And when the sun moves into position at the cross junction, we have the solstices and equinoxes, the rising of the sun. And this is an explanation of why we have in the Bible the famous star in the east, and the 3 wise men following that star. Now, the star that never sets, or the great star that was the bright star in heaven, we have to understand is nothing but the sun itself. There's no bright star that the 3 holy men were following. I mean, if it was a bright star, then what did these guys do during the day when there's no stars out? Did they stay at the Howard Johnson and get up and jump on their camels at night and make their way to Bethlehem? Of course not. We understand that this is a propaganda story, and that the bright star that is in the sky is nothing but the sun itself. They were astrologers plotting the sun. They were travelers coming to acknowledge the rising of the sun at the equinox. The word Easter comes from 2 words, eastern and star. The famous eastern position where the sun rises on the eastern equinox. Equinox meaning equal day, equal night. Throughout all the corporate logos of the world, we'll find so many examples of this cross point of the zodiac. That's what you're seeing when you look at NATO and many of these other logos. The merchant hasn't the faintest idea what these symbols mean, but the ad men who draw them up are aware that they are descendants of the stellar cult, and they know the power of these symbols. And we have, of course, a Bible, and we have a New Testament, but we clearly find that the New Testament is divided into 4 books, not 3, not 5, but 4. The reason, again, has to do with the zodiac. Those 4 books or Gospels are known as the book of Matthew, the book of Mark, the book of Luke, and the book of John. Everyone is taught that from point go. But what we're not taught is that those 4 books of the Bible just represent the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac. The book of Aries, the book of Libra, the book of Leo, and the book of Aquarius. How can that be? He says that it was not and is still not possible to ascertain when and how those early Gospels came into being. Neither original manuscripts, not early references to such manuscripts existed. And even approximate dating is uncertain. Now, Ernest Busenbach, in his book Symbols, Sex, and the Stars, says that not only do the Gospel writers fail to offer appropriate evidence to substantiate their claims upon the grounds of reasonable probability, but their numerous discrepancies, contradictions, and omissions, their readiness to accept as facts rumors and legends which they have heard at third and fourth hand, their obvious role as reformers, their desire to promote these doctrines, and their apparent willingness to even invent stories to promote these doctrines is proof that instead of being objective historians, they were decidedly propagandists. Indeed, if any subject other than religion were involved, is it extremely doubtful whether any body of thoughtful men would take their writings of such men seriously. Tony Bushby says that church experts admit to no evidence of the existence of the Gospels for at least a century after the time it is said Jesus Christ was born in a manger. The most ancient literature fails to show any trace of the acquaintance with, nor the use of, the Gospels we know today. It is not possible to find in any writings compiled between the beginning of the 1st century and the middle of the 2nd century any reference to Jesus Christ or the Gospels. So what we're talking about is that the Christians didn't have it until they get to Rome and realize, wait a minute, we can soup this whole story up with the zodiac. We've got to turn back to the stellar cult. They had it all nailed down. Let's just borrow some of their mythologies and, re-script our stuff because it's familiar to all the people of the world. Now, Tony Bushby in Bible Fraud says the Dead Sea Scrolls made no mention of Jesus Christ or the early Christian church. It has long been known that there was information in the Dead Sea Scrolls damning to Christian beliefs, and the church's high-level involvement with interpreting the scrolls fostered a grave element of suspicion. Since the scrolls were found some 6 decades ago, close associates of the Vatican were placed in dominant positions in every phase of the investigation and translation of the scrolls. The priests regulated the flow of information and controlled its release. Now, those who've done their homework with Christianity, who've studied Christianity, know that its birthplace was at the Constantine's Council of Nicaea. Okay, so the Council of Nicaea is where everyone who would be the original patriarchs and founders of the Christian religion got together at a place. On June 21st, the day of the summer solstice, isn't that interesting? On June 21st, the day of the summer solstice, a total of 2,048 presbyters, deacons, subdeacons, acolytes, and exorcists gathered at Nicaea to decide what Christianity really was, what it should be, and what writings were to be used, and who was to be its God. The Emperor Constantine presided over the council. Dean Millman says of this, nowhere is Christianity less attractive and less authoritative than in these councils of the church. The degeneracy is rapid from the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD to the first of Ephesus in 431 AD, where each party came determined to use every means of haste, maneuver, court, influence, bribery to crush its adversary. Tony Bushby says of it, after a long and bitter debate, a vote was taken, and it was with a majority show of hands that Judas Chrestus and Rabbi Jesus both became God, 161 votes to 157. A new God was proclaimed and officially ratified by Emperor Constantine. So we have 2 Jesuses. We have Jesus the Christ and his brother Judas, equally being thought of as good candidates for the Messiahship. Tony Bushby in his works even points out that when we're reading about the so-called biography aspect of Jesus Christ, we're actually reading about 2 individuals, not one, all mixed together. As we saw, Madame Blavatsky's talking about when we read the early Old Testament, it's 2 deities. We've got a Jehovah and an Elohim, and we've got the gods of different cults, all intermixed. Well, that must account for the reason why we have this wrathful God on one hand, and suddenly we have this very beneficent and benevolent and loving God on the other. Well, we're talking about more than one God. Tony Bushby says that the emperor then instructed the bishop Eusebius to compile a uniform collection of new writings to be bound together as one. Eusebius was to arrange for the production of 50 sumptuous copies to be written on parchment in a legible manner and in a convenient portable form by professional scribes thoroughly accomplished in their art. Make them to astonish, said Emperor Constantine. This was the first mention of finished copies of the Christian New Testament in the history of mankind. With his instructions now fulfilled, Emperor Constantine decreed that the new writings be thereafter called the words of God, and be attached to copies of the Hebrew Old Testament. Emperor Vespasian in the 1st century had proclaimed the entire Jewish territory the personal property of the Roman emperors, and his decision was officially ratified by the Senate. In effect, all later emperors were in control of the Jewish religion. Emperor Constantine effectively attempted to amalgamate the earlier Jewish religion with his new cult. By legal inheritance, he was also the Messiah. After Eusebius had finished drawing upon the large array of presbyter's texts, Constantine then ordered them to be destroyed by fire, and any man found concealing one should be stricken off his shoulders, that is, beheaded. Tony Bushby goes on to say, it is important to note that the format of the name Jesus Christ was not cemented down until the time of the Reformation. That is the 14th and 17th centuries AD. For in earlier times it had several renditions, such as Yeshua Christ or Yeshua Christos. Now we saw a little earlier that the ecliptic and the celestial equator make the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac, which was the primeval Christian cross and also the pagan cross before that. But also in astrology and astronomy, there are 4 cardinal stars, 4 ancient stars that are of the most greatest importance. And they also make a cross in the heavens. They are Aldebaran, which means in Islamic, it's a Persian word that means the eye of the bull. That's in Taurus. We have Regulus, the great red eye of the lion. We have Antares in Scorpio. And we have Fomalhaut, that's one of the fishes in Aquarius. And these 4 great stars are the precursor, the origin of the 4 sons of Horus. Horus, the god of the old world, had 4 sons. And as we've noticed, many corporate logos. There's cars that go by the name of Forester, but of course if you really examine the word Forester, it actually says 4-star. There they are, the sons of Horus. There's Osiris sitting on his throne, the sun god, attended by his 4 sons, representing the cardinal points and also representing the 4 stars. So Osiris is the sun, just like Christ is the sun at the Last Supper, and the 4 cardinal points are there. The ecliptic and celestial equator intersect at 2 hypothetical points. When the sun arrives annually at these cross points, we have the spring and autumnal equinoxes. When the sun moves 90 degrees, that's 3 months from each of these, we have the 2 solstices. This is a very important point to remember. There it is again. The 12 signs of the zodiac, the earth in the middle, the sun that moves slowly along the belt of the 12 signs, and the 4 cardinal points. When the sun reaches the summer solstice in the sign of Cancer and the winter solstice, it's in the opposite sign of Capricorn. These are at the highest and lowest annual declinations of the sun. And that's why on maps we see the tropics of Cancer and the tropic of Capricorn. All that means is that when you look on a globe, you'll see 2 meridians. One is called the Tropic of Cancer and the other one's called the Tropic of Capricorn. Capricorn is in the south and the Tropic of Cancer is north of the equator. All they are is the highest rising point of the sun. The sun moves to the highest point of its arc during the year in Cancer. And it moves to its lowest point in the late Sagittarius, moving into Capricorn. And that's why you have the solstices at those points. Solstice just meaning sun standing still. However, what I would like to bring out is that Cancer was known in the ancient days, this is where the summer solstice is, Cancer was known in the ancient days as the gate of birth or life. In fact, it was even believed that souls entered in through the moon or entered through the gate of Cancer to take birth through the female. Because of course Cancer is the female water sign. And Capricorn was known as the gate of mortality or the gate of death. So facing Cancer is Capricorn, which is where the souls were meant to leave the terrestrial sphere after their sojourn, what we call life. The tropics of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. And this is one of the reasons, again, in a practical context, that cities like Vatican City, like London, like Washington, use this circular motif in the Piazzas, these beautiful architectural edifices, but you'll always see the gate of the north and the gate of the south. Pall Mall in London is a perfect example of this zodiological motif. Cancer is also very interesting because that's where the bear is. And the movement of the bear through the whole annual cycle makes the symbol of the swastika. You take the little bear and you position it at 4 points and it will make the symbol of, we know as the swastika. We know that America is born in July 4th. That's the sign of Cancer. That's why its symbol is the bear of the California flag. It's to commemorate Cancer and the northerly sign. Cancer is also very interesting because being the northerly sign, it sits beside Leo, which is also a northerly sign. Leo is always been signified by the lion, the red lion, the ruddy lion. And the sign of Cancer, which was lunar, ruled by the moon, the most ancient symbol of Cancer was the unicorn, the pale white unicorn. So if you're a Cancer, you know that your symbol is the crab. But long before it was the crab, the symbol of the unicorn was the symbol. And that's why you see on royal heraldry, the royal families are all very aware of this. They design their cities this way, they put their throne rooms this way, and even their heraldry shows you the red lion of Leo right beside the unicorn of Cancer, the pale white moon. Now in the story of Jesus we have of course the famous motif of the birthday of Jesus. It's well brought out. It's a famous story, Nativity, that the Son of God is a historical personage, they try to tell us, and that he has a birthday, the Nativity. From Fraser we find that the custom of celebrating Christ's birth began in Egypt, being derived from the mother goddess cult there, and the Christians there celebrated it on 6th of January. Okay, so the original date of birth of the sun god from ancient times was January 6th. By the 4th century, it had become generally established in the East. The Western Church had never recognized the 6th of January as the true date, and in time, its decision was accepted by the Eastern Church. At Antioch, this change was not introduced until 375 AD. Now, the reason why the Fathers transferred the celebration of the 6th of January to the 25th of December was this. It was the custom of the heathen to celebrate on the same 25th of December the birthday of the sun, at which they kindled lights in token of festivity. In these solemnities and festivities, the Christians also took part. Accordingly, when the doctors of the church perceived that the Christians had a leaning to this festival, they took counsel and resolved that the true nativity should be solemnized on that day and the festival of the Epiphany on the 6th of January. Accordingly, along with this custom, the practice has prevailed, the kindling of fires until the 6th. Alexander Del Mar, in his fine book, Middle Ages Revisited, says, Sir Isaac Newton, in his prophecies of Daniel, showed that not only the solar festivals, but all the other principal ones observed by the early church were Roman festivals fitted with new names. There's nothing holy about the Holy Roman Empire. There's nothing holy about Constantine. And sadly, there's nothing holy about modern Christianity that came right out of that. Now, Melito of Sardis, the 2nd century theologian, said that King of Heaven, Prince of Creation, Son of the Eastern Sky, who appeared both to the dead in Hades and to the mortals upon earth, he, the only true Helios, arose for us out of the highest summits of heaven. So wait a minute, I thought that Jesus rose out of the highest summits of heaven. No, Helios did, the King of Heaven, the Son. Here's a passage. They are all thine, all those who come to thee, great and small, they belong to thee. They who live upon the earth, they all reach thee. Thou art their master, There is none outside thee. Sounds like a lovely biblical passage, doesn't it? But guess what? That's from the Louvre stele, an Egyptian hymn to the sun god of the Egyptians, Osiris. So we've heard about the rising of the sun from the equinox of the spring up through Cancer, the northern sign, and then as it subsides down towards the fall months. That's why it's called fall, because the sun is falling into the cold winter months for another sojourn. That is called the underworld cycle. And as the solar cult became powerful, they wanted to re-script the mythology and make these southern signs be given over to or attributed to the darker powers, to the more what they had as the satanic energy or the evil ones. And of course, that included the women, because remember I said in the solar cult and Saturnian cult, the women were always considered auxiliaries of the negative power. And we see this when we look at the zodiac idea of the sun, the great hero, losing his rays and shrinking and being found impotent and weak and falling into the female signs of Libra and Virgo and Libra. This is clearly shown in the story of Delilah. The word Delilah comes from Layla, which means night, and Di, in the ancient languages of the world, meant Daleth. In Hebrew it's Daleth and Delta. So Di meant the doorway. So Delilah just simply means the door of the night. We don't have time to explore it all here, but if you get into mythology, you'll realize that the sun receding into the fall months, losing his hair, is the idea of the sun's rays being lost. And the old sun, old father time, losing his potency and his power and being weakened, or having his eyes put out, being blinded. It's another motif that you'll see a lot of mythology. And of course, always somewhere there's some evil female bringing it all about. This is a story which would have been nonsense to the stellar and lunar cult, but carried a lot of weight later on. So Libra, the sign of the female where the sun goes into the underworld. In fact, if you are a Libra, you'll know that your symbol is that little one on the right. It is a straight bar, and then there's a loop. Well, that little loop there is the sun, half above and half below the meridian of the western horizon. After you get through Libra, the sun makes its way into Scorpio. Scorpio has always been the skeleton. You always see it symbolizes death, the sign of Scorpio. And that's when the sun, that's why today in Halloween, for instance, we have a pumpkin, which is always orange because that represents the sun, and you put a little evil face on it. It's a composite symbol. The pumpkin is nothing more than the sun. But now that the sun has become part and aligned with the southern signs, we put a little demonic face on it because it's fallen into the power of the evil ones. We worship it every year and haven't the faintest idea where it comes from. Scorpio, a huge sign in the ancient calendar, understood to be where the sun goes to die. The whole idea of St. Peter, who's another solar god being crucified invertedly, represents this fall of the solar king into the underworld. Of course, we understand that the tarot cards commemorate this, the hanged man. We're seeing tarot symbolism in the Bible. The hanged man is associated with the sign of Scorpio. We also hear about Odin, literally hanging upside down on the tree of life. As I said a little earlier, we do know that Scorpio is symbolized by the scorpion. But just in the case of Cancer, Cancer's original symbol was not the crab, but the scarabus beetle. They changed it from the Egyptian scarab to the crab. But originally the sign of Cancer was the scarabus beetle, and then before that it was the unicorn, or contemporaneously it was the unicorn. Same thing in Scorpio. Yes, the scorpion rules, but the real symbol of Scorpio is the constellation which is the biggest one in the sky in the area of Scorpio, and that's Aquila, the eagle. So when we see that the American flag, the American symbol is Aquila, understand that we're talking Scorpio here. America is under Scorpio, as well as Cancer. And we see some corporate logos using the great eagle wings. We're talking power and money, because Scorpio, as an astrological sign, rules power, money, government, domination. Of course, we go into this much more thoroughly in the subversive use of sacred symbolism in the media, the other program in this series. And number 13, which is always a associated with Scorpio, the tarot card, number 13, rules the sign of Scorpio, is found on the dollar bill in numerous times. The 13 arrows, the 13 berries, the 13 leaves, the 13 stripes, the 13 stars, the 13 levels of the pyramid. It has many reasons for this, but one of them is to represent the sign of Scorpio, which is the eagle, Aquila. Just as you go past Scorpio, you come to Sagittarius, or you come to the place between the signs, and you're very close. When you're in Sagittarius, you're very close to what is known as galactic center. Galactic center, the center of the galaxy. The center of the galaxy is in the constellation of Sagittarius, and that is in fact why you have the archer. The archer pulling his bow, that arrow of Sagittarius, was meant to face galactic center like a man shooting at a target. That's why the symbol of Sagittarius was chosen. Originally he wasn't a horse, it was a dragon. He was half man, half dragon. Later the image was softened into a horse, the centaur. And the symbol for the center of the galaxy, for galactic center, was known from time immemorial as the black sun. And on Bracken House here in London, and many other buildings, as a secret society symbol primarily, you'll see the symbol of the black sun. And when you see that symbol, realize that it is referring to the center of the galaxy, not the physical sun. In the tarot card number 14 that refers to Sagittarius, we'll see something interesting. The figure there has her foot in water and one foot on earth. So the card that represents Sagittarius, the sign of Sagittarius, shows a figure with one foot in water and one foot on earth. Now this is, again, symbolic communication. The water sign, Scorpio, is a water sign. So the angel is literally having her one foot in the water sign of Scorpio and on the fire sign, the earth sign of Capricorn. Because after Sagittarius comes Capricorn. So Sagittarius is in the middle of the water sign of Scorpio and the earth sign of Capricorn. It's just a way that the ancients used to symbolize things. But how did the ancients actually discover this phenomena of the solstices and the equinox? It was a very lengthy process, of course. The ancients used to notice on their sundials that the shadow did something strange as the sun approached these southerly signs. As the sun descended down towards Capricorn, past the celestial equator, past the celestial center, the galactic center, and as it passed into the sign of Capricorn, it would stop. It came to a point around about December 21st, and then it would stop dead in the sky. The ancients noticed this, and for 3 days they noticed that the sun would not move. But on the third day, that's about the 23rd, it would start to move again and resume its northerly course. And for those 3 days, were sort of like dark days, or the dead days. And that's why we have the term solstice, because it means solstice, sun standing still. The ancients noticed this. That's why we have Jesus saying, "For 3 days I will die and rise again." We hear that when Jesus was born, for various reasons, his family had to run away, and they made flight into Egypt. Now, what we have to discover about this, it concerns also celestial activity. We say that the winter months, the winter solstice is in Capricorn, but the earth turns. So yes, December, during the day, you can't see the stars. And what you don't realize is that during a day, the planet Earth is moving around the sun. So when the night sky comes upon us at the evening, when we go out to look, we're not going to see the stars of Capricorn. They were out during the day, but we couldn't see them. There's a 180-degree turn that's just happened. So when we go out at night and we look into the night sky, we will actually see the constellations of the opposite sign. Because again, the earth has turned 180 degrees. So during the evening time at Christmas, during the solstice time, if you go out and look into the heavens at night, you will see the constellations of Cancer and Leo, the northern signs. And vice versa. If you went out on the night of the summer solstice, you would see the constellations of the southerly signs of Capricorn and Aquarius and so on. So we understand that during the solstice, during the period of Christmas, the stars that are in the sky at night are the sign of Cancer. And Cancer was always the symbol of the Holy Mother, the female mother sign. Now Cancer as a constellation is very interesting because it has the least brightest stars of any of the constellations. And because of that fact, it was known in ancient times as the wilderness. It was literally known as the wilderness because it was so bleak. It does have stars in it, many of them, but they're faint in magnitude. So the ancient astrologers used to call it the wilderness or the desert. That's why we hear so many stories, for instance, about Moses and Joseph and Jesus and all sorts of patriarchs and prophets going through the 40 days in the wilderness. We imagine that somebody going out into the wilderness for 40 days. No, it isn't. It's to do with the sun, which is represented by all these heroes, passing through the sign of the zodiac, Cancer, a very big constellation, for 40 days in the wilderness. So when we realize that the stars of the sign of Cancer are seen at the time of Jesus' birth, we can unravel a great mystery. Because as I said, although the constellations are not bright in Cancer, there are some very important star groupings there. And one of the most important, that's a constellation within Cancer, is known as the cradle or the manger. And go to an old planisphere and you'll see it right there. There is a constellation in Cancer called the manger. Now that is why when the sun is descending towards Capricorn and moves into the period we know as Christmas or the summer solstice, and we hear that the son is born in a manger, born in an inn in the manger, this is a reference to the sun being back of the sign of Cancer. Now when John the Baptist declares that he is not the true light, but the one who follows him will be the true light, he is identifying himself with the moon and with the lunar cult. He was also the man of the wilderness, a term which implied the night sky. He had his head removed and he was followed by the solar king. Pickett and Prince in their book Templar Revelation say that the ritual of baptism as done by the Baptist has no precedent in Judaism. That's right, but it does in the old lunar cult of old. And John the Baptist, using the water to purify, is identifying himself with the lunar cult, and he's supplanted by the sun king to come. And the moon is related to Cancer, the sign of Cancer. We also read that Jesus was born of a virgin. We looked at this a little earlier. But again, if we go to the chart of the earth and we find something very interesting, we discover that if the signs, the constellations, the starry groups are reversed at night, then that goes for the ones that are on the eastern and western horizon as well. If the constellations of Cancer are seen in the sign of Capricorn at night, during the solstice, then what is seen on the vernal equinox? That means if you look to the east, what star groups are rising there just before morning? The sign of Virgo, which is usually on the western horizon, is seen rising just before sunbreak on the eastern horizon. And the sign of Virgo was, of course, always known as the Mother of God. So in the chart of Jesus Christ, at that day, at that moment, you'll see the sign of Virgo popping its head up above the eastern horizon. So it was said that the son who is born in a manger is born of a virgin, because literally Virgo is overlooking the solstice point. As I said, the following of the bright star in heaven merely referred to the sun that was being followed to the point of the solstice. We also hear at the birth of Jesus that there arrive not only 3 shepherds, but 3 wise men. Well, this can be explained again in the same way, using the same astro-theological reasoning, the same astro-theological device. On the western horizon, if Virgo is rising on the eastern side, then the eastern constellations must be appearing on the western side. And that's exactly what happens. The sign of Taurus, the stars of Taurus, the constellations of Aries and Taurus, are seen on the western horizon. But within Taurus are 3 very important stars. There's many constellations in Taurus, like the Pleiades and Aldebaran, the star Aldebaran. But there's also Orion, the constellation of Orion. And Orion is always distinguished by 3 parallel stars, the 3 stars in the famous belt of Orion. But in ancient days, those 3 stars were referred to literally as the 3 wise men. It's as simple as that. So the 3 wise men who visit Jesus in the manger in Bethlehem are the 3 stars overlooking the western equinox, but again overlooking the manger or the cradle of the solstice point. The 3 wise men are seen in ancient Sumeria and Babylon Here's a picture of the sun god in his tabernacle, in his precinct. In front of the precinct, or we see the solar disk. There's the sun, the bright star, and in front of it the three little wise men. The three shepherds are the three wise men. And the king is holding the ring and the rod, the ancient symbols of royalty. There's nothing new in Christianity. And as I said earlier, the shepherds who watch their flock by night is a clear symbol of the shepherds, because the crook of the shepherd, it refers to the